Hello, welcome to A Lesson Before Writing, episode 37. I'm Ted Morrissey, and I'm here with my co-hosts, one of whom is Grant Tracey, and this is Grant's most recent book that we've published, his fourth Hayden Fuller novel, A Shoeshine Kill. The paperback edition also includes some Eddie Sands short stories. That's his other noir series that he develops. And then here with Brady Harrison, whose most recent book that we published is A Journey to Al Ramel, recently a finalist for the Big Other Book Award. Then I'll plug my own, what is the name? Oh, yeah, Aspiring Child, a biography of Mary W. Shelley in sonnets, came out this past January. Doing okay, as books of, collections of poetry goes. Recently, one of the sonnets was shortlisted for the Lighthouse Poetry Prize. So that was very cool. And I've actually, within the last month or so, started working with a translator on a Spanish language edition, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. But here we are. And Grant, you had a change of venue. You had to switch because you had some storms or.
My lights flickered a couple times. I don't think the power will go out, but I was afraid we'd have signal interruption. And most universities I've attended, well, the three that I have degrees from, always seem to have generators and they always maintain their power. So I thought I should come up to my office where it'll be safe and we won't mess up the podcast. But that was my thoughts. So here I am. The roads were pretty flooded on the way up here. It was bad. So
the flooding from the rains.
Yeah, it just hit really hard. Now there's a break in the action. Looking out my office window, and but it was really coming down when I left.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Brady and I were talking a bit before you got on because you were running a little late because of your change of venue, and we've had big rains here, but we're also dealing now with bad air conditions because of Canadian wildfire smoke. You guys have probably been dealing with that in Iowa too, I'm guessing, or maybe it's an Illinois, Indiana thing.
Well, no, it's I've got my son-in-law lives in and my daughter live in Cincinnati, and Ohio's been hit pretty bad. Cleveland and Toledo, really, really bad. Toronto, of course, my hometown. Orange skies. I've seen all kinds of pictures of it. And then yesterday we were coming back from Kansas, and I couldn't believe how smoky the sky looked. I mean, in Kansas, there was nothing. You would never even known there were wildfires. But as soon as we got about 20 miles from town, I'm looking out at the sky and I'm like, that's not incoming rain. And then you could see sort of a brown haze, and then you couldn't quite make out the lights along the highway. And I'm like, this isn't good. So yeah, we're getting a little bit of the effect of it down here. I know Chi-Town had it pretty bad a few days ago, but yeah. So we're only 5 hours from Chicago. So
right. Well, Brady, you will post occasionally your pristine blue Montana skies as you go hiking in the mountains. I presume locally, at least, you haven't had too many of those kinds of issues.
Not this summer. We've been lucky, but if you live in the West, then forest fires are a fact of life, and routinely and increasingly, the smoke will fill our valley, so you can't see the mountains across the way. Like if I look out my window, I see mountains right there. But the smoke can be so bad, and the sky's so brown and orange, and everybody keeps posting pictures of these dramatic sunsets, but it's because of the particulates in the air. What's making the sky so spectacular in terms of colors is smoke. So yeah, it has the tidings of the apocalypse some days.
Well, I actually kind of wanted to go there, not geographically, but since I've been all about the biography of Mary W. Shelley, as you guys probably know, Frankenstein, the novel, grew out of this is all famous, infamous, whatever, that out of a ghost story writing session. Because when she and Percy Shelley and her sister Claire, stepsister Claire, went to Geneva to hang out with Lord Byron and John Polidori, et cetera, et cetera. the summer of 1816 was known as the summer as the year without a summer, because there had been this volcanic eruption on the other side of the world, and it put so much smoke and ash in the air that eventually drifted over to Europe, that basically that summer it was cold, overcast, rainy all the time. So they had gone there to go boating and swimming and having all these outdoor activities, and they got stuck inside most of the time because the weather was so awful. But then also, it seems as if that really dreary, awful weather was, kind of fueled the darkness and the brooding, tone and mood that she wrote into the novel Frankenstein. So not only did it like physically kind of keep them cooped up inside, which, sparked, no pun intended, her writing, getting the idea to write Frankenstein, but the weather itself contributed to some of the gloominess and so forth in her writing, it seems. And we're seeing in our time period an explosion in dystopian fiction. You mentioned apocalyptic, and I think a lot of people are getting that vibe. I wrote, it's been a couple of years, and I've kind of set it aside temporarily, but I wrote some post-apocalyptic dystopian stuff, and I was shocked at how easily I found publishers for those stories. And I was shocked at how many places I had to send them, because, I'd go to Chill Subs or Duotrope or whatever it might be. And there were like these brand new journals popping up constantly that were just devoted and oftentimes to dystopic literature. So I wonder if the massive flooding and the, wildfires and the smoke and all that is sort of also fueling, fiction writers to write all this dystopic stuff. I know you talked, Grant, about how North American Review seems to get a fair amount of dystopic, post-apocalyptic fiction. Do you think that maybe it's environmental, at least in part, that people are turning to this kind of fiction?
Yeah, I do. And thing kind of goes in waves. Like, I don't know. I think I mentioned this on another podcast, but like 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I noticed a lot of working class fiction that we were getting in as a product of the working class. I was sort of drawn to that stuff. And then Trump came into power, and because of the justifiably so anti-MAGA backlash, unfortunately, working class people were kind of lumped into this category of being a basket full of deplorables, and to quote Hillary. And I saw less journals taking working class fiction and more taking dystopic fiction. It became kind of a shift. So I think that's environmental. I think the Anthropocene, the idea we all got, a plastic spoon in our heads from all the 20-ounce bottles of water we've drank. The layer of plastic covering the planet. I think a lot of people are aware of these things, and I think the pandemic, I mean, I noticed a big upsurge in dystopic fiction. I thought we would go the other way. I thought with the pandemic, COVID, and being locked in, people would respond in a hopeful way. I don't know why I thought that. I just thought that might be a human reaction to being, cooped up, that there would be more upbeat, fiction being written. But that wasn't the case. It seemed that people doubled down on, and I guess I'm doing the same thing with the noir I write. I mean, I'm writing dark stuff, so I'm part of that zeitgeist that's part of our culture right now. So yeah, Ted, I think it's totally related to the environment, but I think it's also related to geopolitical stuff, and yeah, I mean, COVID, all that stuff. So yeah, it's definitely what's current. It's still current, and I do a lot of, as you guys know, we do the Kurt Vonnegut Fiction Prize, and a lot of the spec fic we get leans more into dystopic spec fiction than, I don't know. I don't even know what the other kinds would be. And I mentioned this several podcasts ago, but it was during the pandemic that the top, and the Trump administration, that the the top selling books on Amazon were like, Brave New World, 1984, Fahrenheit 451. Those were the books that people were turning back to again and again and again. So yeah, definitely part of
Mhm.
the zeitgeist.
Yeah, Brady, what I don't know, what are your thoughts on the environmental factors? I mean, you and I recently had an exchange where you were asking about maybe getting back to working on your Hemingway inspired story collection. So it seems like maybe you're not directly, responding to current situation, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on all that?
Oh, well, so many thoughts. For sure. I think young folks, my daughter included, are terrified by what's going on and the active denial and suppression of science, the denial of climate change. Yeah, the and to go to connect to one of Grant's points, there's something there's something so discouraging, isn't there? Like I don't know if we've really talked along these lines, but what is a book for? And so Orwell and Huxley and Atwood, I mean, they've been speaking plainly about the risks of our future, and yet we go along. Like, and you think of all the famous anti-war literature, and yet we go to war. And so there's a kind of heartbrokenness, I think, is there out there because we know what's going on, and yet it doesn't really, the clearest voices on it don't really seem, at least in as far as I can tell, to be prevailing. Uh, yeah.
Right. Well, there was a time when our political leaders were well read, and not just newspapers. Obviously, that's important too for world leaders, but fiction. I'm Beowulf is one of my many interests, and in Beowulf, circles, people talk about the fact that there was this picture of John F. Kennedy when he was a senator or whatever he was before he became president, and on his desk in the Senate was a well-thumbed copy of Beowulf. And we know he was a big reader, and obviously Barack Obama, big reader, and it's very reassuring to think that our leaders are not only digesting a lot of current data, but also are thinking about, what's it mean to be a great leader? What's it mean? What is heroism? On and on and on. And I think nowadays we don't tend to get that sense very much that our leaders are great readers. So, yeah, I don't know, Grant. I know you probably concur with that, but what are
Hmm.
your thoughts on that observation?
Yes, I concur. And I always thought it was super cool, at least the legend. I'm sure it's true, that JFK loved James Bond books and the Americanization of Bond, by including Jack Lord in the original Doctor No and shifting some things around, became standard fare. Like it took off because someone had heard, that's one of my favorite books, Ian Fleming, and then everybody was wanting to read Bond. So it was definitely like right time, early 1960s. And I can't think of any presidents in recent memory that have had that kind of impact on saying, what literature or genre fiction, whatever you want to call it, although literature is a genre. But anyway, that they're reading, and having that kind of impact on culture. And I'm always shocked when I watch debates and they ask, "What's a book you've read recently?" And they struggle to come up with something, and they come up with something really kind of just not very good. And yeah, that always shocks me. So the
Mm-hmm.
dumbing down of culture is definitely kind of where we're at right now, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, Brady, thoughts on that in particular?
Oh, well, I think if JFK were alive today, I mean, and he certainly was a deeply problematic person in his measure, but I think he'd be writing a book, Profiles of Cowardice, not encourage.
Yes.
I mean, there are many courageous people. I mean, Minneapolis demonstrated that abundantly. The profiles in cowardice, I think, would be at the upper levels. Um, yeah.
Well,
Where does the heart break? I do have a kind of literary focus to maybe bring this back to some of the terrain. If shall I do that or
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
yeah?
sooner the
So
better.
well, I've been thinking about one thing I've been thinking about lately. I've been working on the novel, but I've been spending a lot of time thinking and taking notes for an essay, a personal essay, not a genre I write in very often, but for a long personal essay that I've been kicking around. And so some part of my brain, a good part of my brain, is working on the novel, but also working silently or in fits and starts. Um, in my thought process on this article and then the Hemingway stories. And so this connects back, Ted, to your point, to the reminder that you're working on the translation of Beowulf, and you're working on a collection of your essays, and then writing fiction. And so it's the problem, and we have talked about this some, but it's become a little bit more dramatic for me of late. The problem of multitasking, whether it's a good thing for us, or whether we should be, or whether a writer should be, one ought to be more singular in their pursuit. And so I think Grant has more of that single-mindedness, particularly in
Yeah.
production of novels. But at the same time, the Eddie Sands is calling, right? The
Yeah.
cab's out front, it's idling at the curb.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
well,
that's been on my mind lately.
yeah, and Grant, you mentioned last episode that you're working with a buddy on a new film, and you have some ideas for film scripts and so forth,
Yeah.
and so on. Yeah, I've been actually a little worried about that myself because I was working on a novel, and then I got this idea for this quick publication of a collection of lectures that turned into not being quick at all. So I'm coming writing these new commentaries. My original plan for the summer, back in the spring, was to really knuckle down on my Beowulf translation and see if I could mainly get it done by the end of the summer and maybe be able to put that book out next year. But then I got the idea for the essay collection thing and that. And then this opportunity arose to work with a translator on some Spanish language, a Spanish language edition of the sonnets. And that seemed very doable. It's just 100 sonnets. How long can that take? And then somebody contacted me who's also a William Gass person who wanted me to contribute to a collection of essays on William Gass. And so, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And I worry that I am maybe developing like attention deficit disorder the older I get, because I used to knuckle down, and boy, I was committed to finishing a novel, and it would take me years, but I wouldn't write anything else really in the meantime. But that just isn't me anymore. I just bounce around between projects like I don't know, like a mosquito or something from one arm to the next or something. But I don't know. Grant, what are you, would you diagnose me as ADHD or
No,
what's
I
your
mean,
perspective?
well, okay. What's my perspective? Brady's right. I mean, the car is idling right now. I've got like some other Eddie Sands stories, percolating in my head. I'm getting together with my daughter on Wednesday, and we're going to write. And I've already thought up another one that I want to work on. Um, I I think that you could probably find a way, Ted, because of the voices of your work, to argue that all that stuff is feeding a ginormous lake of your creativity. So, like translation, working with a collection, that's still part of the Ted Morrissey project. Which, like for me, just it's sometimes like I only have to filter things through myself because that's what I can talk concretely about. So, like for me, I'm constantly reading crime stuff to help feed the crime stories. But I also read literature because I know, not that crime's not literature, but you know what I'm saying, high literature, whatever. Because I want my language to be good, and so that feeds into the crime stuff. So I watch a lot of true crime stuff on TV. I watch a lot of old TV shows. It's just narratives. But I feel all of it working on literary magazine review, working with my students on the creative writing. I see, instead of seeing that as multitasking, I see it as all tributaries that are leading to this. The tributaries flow into a lake or away from a lake. I can't remember. One goes one way, rivers or tributary. I might have had a bad metaphor there, but the point is, I feel it's all feeding the bigger project, which is my love for writing crime stories. So like editing North American Review does not take me away from uh, my larger project. Teaching classes doesn't take me away from my larger project. I'm a writer first, and all that other stuff. Talking to you guys, what we talk about, this could become material for me to think about. I mean, I'm thinking now, maybe I'll have a character who's an environmentalist in the 60s, because that was a big thing back then too. And conservationism, even in the 30s, was a big thing. So 1930s. So maybe that's, I could do something with an empathetic character that, Eddie gets to know and was working with. Ideas are percolating now from this. So it all works for me. I mean, maybe that means I'm single-minded. I don't know, but I don't see it as, I don't do things I don't want to do. Let's just put it at that. So if someone asks me to do a project that I'm not super interested, I'm not going to just be nice and say yes. I mean, it's got to be, something that makes me joyous and gets me excited. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I kind of want to follow up on that, but I don't want to leave Brady waiting in the wings too much. So what are your thoughts on that? You obviously have a tendency to want to multitask as well.
No, indeed, I do, but I think, like, I wonder about getting things done, like just the basic. If I were to do this, then I would get this done. But if I think here and I think here, and I like the way that Grant is talking, and I like the tributary, the ideas flowing into the river, which flows to the sea or to the lake. Like I like that very well. But I'm thinking even just in practical terms, like it's hard to get anything done, and our projects take a long time. A story, right, one can do. Maybe a sonnet, Ted, you talk about getting, it's a morning's work, and then revise and think and put them all together. So it accretes or accumulates in time. But the longer projects, like I wonder if I wouldn't be better served by denying some of those other energies in order to get something done,
Yeah.
get it done.
Yeah,
Well,
but
go ahead, Grant.
I was just going to say, but your longer projects are so thought-provoking that it needs to just stay longer, is what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
maybe so. Maybe so.
I remember you always saying, and I really admire this about you, like, you want to have to work as a reader, right? And to be challenged mental. And I think to be a writer who writes that kind of stuff, that's not something you can sit down in an afternoon and pound out a 3,500 word Eddie Sands story. That's all I'm saying. So I think instead of seeing it as handicap, not politically correct, instead of seeing it as a hindrance, I would see it as it's the engine that drives you, and that's a good thing. I see it positively. It's part of who you are as an artist, and that's good.
Right, right. Well, yeah, no, I like that. And I do think that my willingness to skip around between projects and so forth and so on, I've done that enough, and I've been at this long enough that I do get a sense that each of the projects ends up better, more sophisticated, or whatever, because of that. Because, like you say, this project will then feed into that project, and so forth and so on. And if I just, shoulder to the wheel and got some novel or some this or some that done in fairly short order, then it wouldn't be the same thing that I end up producing. And I want to believe that that thing that I do end up producing is better, more interesting, more complex, whatever you want to say, because of the fact it's just taken longer and other things have come into the mix that wouldn't have if I had pounded it out in 6 months or something like that. Yeah, I'm okay with it. It's just like as I get older, I feel like I'm doing it more and more. And then also, I mean, I hate to say it, I mean, I'm only going to be 64 this year, and luckily I'm in good health. I mean, hopefully I'm writing for another 30 years or something. But you got to keep an eye on the calendar too. And how
Yeah.
many more big projects do I have time left to write? Something obviously I never worried about in my 30s and 40s, but now in my mid 60s, it's starting to be something I think about from time to time. Um, the other thing, too, is as long as it takes me to read like a big book, I figured out, I don't know, a couple years ago that if I only read big books for the rest of my life, given my, average longevity, blah, 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 I could only read, I don't know, 50 more books or something like that. Yeah, I can't remember the number I came up with, but it wasn't very many. And so for a couple of years, I really focused on reading just really short novels, novellas, and I, would get interested in a really big book. Then I'd say, I better not get started on that because that's going to take, I can only read 2 books a year if I read these really big books. But now I'm kind of getting back into, in fact, I just the other day started Swan's Way. I never read Proust, and I really want to. So I think I'm going to work on Proust now, but again, by doing that, it just eliminates so many great books that are out there that are much shorter than I could read. I did read, and Brady, I think, saw this online, D.H. Lawrence's last novel, and call it a novel is pretty generous. It's really thin, called, and Grant, you're not going to like the title, and I get it. It's called The Virgin and the Gypsy. And it's, if you can get past Lawrence's overt anti-Semitism in the book, it was really well written, and the cover completely is misleading. It sounds like it's going to be like a Lady Chatterley Lover kind of D.H. Lawrence book, and it really doesn't turn out to be that at all. But again, it was very short, so I was able to knock that out very quickly, and that's kind of stuff I think I like reading too. But I also want to get into some really heavy duty Proust for a while. I know, Brady, I know you love those big baggy monster books. Do you ever think about, do I want to spend X amount of time on this book, or do I want to spend X amount of time on these 6 books?
Yes, of course. I think that all the time. Before we move on, though, let's not let Lawrence off the hook on the anti-Semitism. Like that guy had some issues, as so many people do. And if you look closely, I've been rewatching Peaky Blinders. I think you'll see a razor blade on Grant's brim there. With the Romany connections. I don't know. I'm just wondering. And
Yeah.
then. Yeah, the other thing, Ted, Grant and I had planned an intervention today on your ADHD, but we're going to let that go now. We've talked it through. But no, of course, yes, I love giant books. I love that, immersion and the month that it takes to read those whacking big books. Always love to teach them. I don't think how many of my students ever finished reading Tristram Shandy or Moby Dick. Only they will know. But yeah, in fact, I had posted Ted. I'm not sure if you saw, but I'm thinking about challenging myself to reading 12 big books in a year. I don't think it can be done, so it's too ambitious. But I love that sustained immersion. But then right now I'm reading, and I brought this along uh, because there's some passages about writing in it that I would could read and we could talk about. But it's 160 pages, so yeah. I mean, like as readers, we love everything, don't we? Right. So yeah, we can do it all. But Time's Winged Chariot, tick tock, certainly feel
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Grant, you're. I mean, I think of you more as someone who really specializes in reading noir, which tend to be shorter books. Do you have any big, book stop kind of book, or doorstop rather kind of books that you've read really loved?
Um, you know, uh, Interesting you bring that up. I like a lot of the books that were written in the 50s and 60s, like the ones I write, like 60,000 words, can read them in 4, 5, 6 hours. And I'd like that sustained narrative, but a lot. I've been kind of getting into Scandinavian noir lately, and the industry kind of changed about 20 years ago, and so many you can even see it with Ed McBain's last books. Like instead of a 200-page novel, 400 pages is the standard thing. So I've been reading the Department Q books, the series. I can't remember the person's name. It's got three names in it. Juicy something. Alden. There's an A in there. Anyway, the books are like this thick, and I'm like, I could do this in 240 pages instead of 400. But I almost feel like there's publishers that want these bigger crime books, like Michael Connolly, and like. So I just see a lot of scene work where there's pages and
James Elroy.
yeah, and pages and pages and pages of dialogue. And I'm like, can't we like compress that a little bit? I know you guys are commenting on the Eddie Sands stuff, all right, where it's like film clips, and I feel like novels. I love a good Earl Stanley Gardner, 200 pages, and it works, So yeah, it's definitely I'm not in those boardroom meetings at these various publishing houses, but it is something I've noticed with the crime novels written today. They're almost double. I would say they're like 120,000 words versus 60,000 back in the day. So
I don't read.
Elizabeth George comes to mind. Sorry, Ted, I'm talking over top of you.
Well, that's all right. I just say I don't read that kind of thing normally, but the speaking of the pandemic, the summer of the lockdown, 2020, some fellow English teachers and I mean, it was somebody else's idea, but they decided, let's have a backyard book club. We can't get together indoors because of the pandemic, but we'll get together in, one of our backyards and we'll have a book that we've chosen each month and we'll read that. And yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. And the first one was chosen, it was okay. But the second book that somebody picked was a Robert Galbraith book, which is J.K. Rowling's pen name, and it's one of the cuckoo something,
Cuckoo's Calling, maybe,
something like that, like 450 pages. And so I started reading it, and and it was okay. I read the first 50 pages, and it wasn't awful, but I hung in there. But I had all the other books I wanted to read. I thought, what, I hate spending an entire month reading this stupid book when I got all these other books I'd rather read. So I stopped reading it. But the day of or day before we're going to get together, I really need to give this another try. So I wonder what will happen if I skip to the last 50 pages, if I'll have any idea like what's going on. So I just skipped. So I read the first 50, skipped 400 pages, read the last 50. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew who all the characters were. I knew what the conflict was. I knew why this was happening at this diner or whatever. It's like, what the hell happened in those 400 pages I skipped? Practically nothing, apparently. So I mean, that kind of comes back to what you're saying, Grant, that it's like, what is all of that if it's not actually feeding the plot of the narrative?
Yeah.
Brady, what were you going to say when we started at the same time there?
Oh, I don't know. A man my age can't be expected to recall what he was thinking 3 minutes ago. Forget that.
All right. Well, there you go. So, speaking of things feeding into each other, I've mentioned before, and we kind of alluded to it briefly at the beginning of this podcast, but I got this idea to put together these 8 lectures that I did between 2018 and 2025 in various places around the world. So half of them I did in person, and then half I did remotely. And then I've been writing these new commentaries for each of the lectures. And lecture number 5 was my second Hue Vietnam keynote. The first one was in person, and the last one, which was just a couple years ago, was done remotely. And the theme of that conference was digital literacy and that kind of thing. And I frankly didn't have a lot of time to throw the lecture together. So I did some pretty familiar stuff, and I talked about digital literacy, but particularly like how you can use it to study Beowulf, and try to make the case for why people in Vietnam and other Asian countries would want to study Beowulf. And actually I use as an example, there's a program in China where students study Beowulf in Old English. And I've had many interactions with the teacher and the students in China, and they're wonderful. It's amazing, what they know about Old English and medieval literature and the poem Beowulf in particular. So it definitely is a thing that can happen. But anyway, so for the commentary on that, I decided, well, I'll bring in a bunch of my Beowulf stuff I've done already and talk about. So here's my idea about, there's more than 350 modern English translations of Beowulf, and there's more, if I check at the end of the week, it'll probably be closer to 400 or something. So it's why bother? Why go through all the trouble when there's plenty of modern English translations out there? Well, every translator thinks they can do something a little different maybe with the text. And here's my theory. That just about all the translations I've read, which are a lot, have either been done by scholars in Old English or by contemporary poets who are translating it into a sort of poetic form. But I don't know of any translations by what I would call an accomplished novelist, ego aside here. And so I think I can bring a sort of novelistic perspective to the story that maybe other translators haven't, but because that opens up some possibilities in the narrative and that kind of thing. But it gets into this whole idea of literary translation versus literal translation and that kind of thing. And I'll come back kind of to you on this, Brady, because we, in A Journey to Al Ramel, and we've talked about this in other podcast episodes, you do have a lot of French without any translation. Have you ever been interested in literary translation, given your, better than average, ability to deal with French, and obviously with some help with some linguistic, lexicons and so forth? I don't know, have you ever thought about translation?
No, I am painfully aware of my limitations in many aspects of life, and my many failings, and the ways I wish I were a better person. But among them, my French skills, with a lot of diligence and a dictionary, I can get by. But yeah, not translated. I would love to see A Journey to Al Ramel, of course, get translated into French. That would be a thrill. But it's so funny, Ted. This is just an aside, and so I'm totally not answering your question, and I'm derailing the conversation, but I'll do it anyway. I've been rereading or reading a newish translation, or at least new to me, of Ovid's Metamorphoses, and I've read a kind of prose translation, I've read a poetic translation, and the differences in translations are often stunning. And I've looked at several different versions of Don Quixote, and so I love the conversation around translation. And you're talking about Proust, which ones should you read? Which Beowulf will you be consulting in your own work? So I mean, as a subject, yeah, I love it, but it's not for me. I know my painful limitations.
Yeah, yeah. Grant, is that a subject in general you've been interested in, or?
I'm fascinated by it because I think not. I'm like Brady. A man's got to know his limitations, and I barely passed the French requirement, so I can get my PhD. But yeah, but I do see it as a creative act. I mean, we had in our department years ago a professor, McGillivray, Catherine, who translated Hélène Cixous. And she would say, there's so many choices constantly she had to make. Is the verb, and I think I've mentioned this before, I walked, I was walking. I mean, which do you choose? And then you constantly are making choices, and you try to get into the flavor of the writer's style, but then you're bringing your own, artistic tendency to it. And I'm always fascinated by reading different, I love, George Simenon, and there's different translations of his books, and different choices are made. And so I know nothing about the ability to do it. I can't do it, but I admire those that do. And like Brady, I would love for my Hayden Fuller stuff to be translated in French, because I know how much they love roman policier and all that kind of stuff, and noir. And I remember when Patrick Modiano won the the Pulitzer Nobel Prize. I read like, I don't know, 15 of his books, but I couldn't help but keep wondering, they were there were different translators, and which is the more authentic one, that old question all the time, what's the authentic text, authentic translated text to read, and who decides that, and how do we decide it? Yeah, it's just fascinating sidebar conversations to have. But yeah, I leave that to others. But I admire the craft of it.
Well, there are literary translators, like professional literary translators who do multiple languages, and I know they're not proficient and fluent in all of them, but they have a way of being able to, I don't know, I guess, digest dictionaries and so forth and so on. So yeah, I mean, I'm not fluent in Old English. Certainly, I need lots of help to get from the Old English into modern English. And I am trying to be true to the texts and so forth, or the original text. The thing that's been really interesting with working with the translations of the Mary Shelley sonnets into Spanish is that because of their being sonnets, we're trying to make sure. And I was very, I used a Petrarchan sonnet format or mode or whatever you want to call it. So with the 8-line beginning and the 6-line conclusion. So very much trying to stay within that. But, Spanish has, I think, the advantage over English of having the potential, at least, of being more musical. There's more musicality about Spanish. But English has an advantage in being more compressed and more compact and being able to pack more meaning and nuance in fewer words and phrases. And so I definitely took advantage of that as I wrote the sonnets. My sonnets tend to be very compressed, but yet I feel like I'm getting a lot of mileage out of my word choices and my phrasing. But then, so an English line comes back from the translator in Spanish, and it's like 3 times as long, and then we're trying to squeeze it into 8 lines. And sometimes I come back like, okay, it seems like it'd be a stronger poem if I wasn't so dead set on it being a 14-line sonnet. And obviously not all sonnets have to be 14 lines. I know that. but anyway, it's a fun sort of, thing to work with, but it is becoming a sort of consistent thing where these lines are coming back way longer. And I find that to try to help things, I'm like revising the original English to say something somewhat different than what it said originally, because that image will fit more nicely in a line in Spanish. And so there's this real give and take between the original versus anyway, it's been a fascinating thing, but I can't imagine like translating Don Quixote. It's hard enough, translating like a 14-line sonnet or something. I can't imagine trying to do a whole novel or whatever, but yeah, it's a fascinating topic. But I don't know. We've been at it for a little while. Maybe we should turn our attention to our featured story. Is that okay with you guys? So yeah, our loyal audience members know that every episode we have a short story that we've read ahead of time. And now we're going to embark on talking about it. This particular story comes from the Potomac Review, issue 78, spring 2026. And when Brady and I were at AWP in Baltimore back in March, I've said previous episodes, I picked up a bunch of literary journals. And so for the last, 3 or 4 episodes, we've been doing stories out of the journals that I picked up when I was at AWP. This is the end of the line. This is the last journal that I picked up there. So, starting next month, we're going to go back to journals that I have subscriptions to or have picked up an odd copy here and there, but not at AWP. But I really, you guys didn't get to see the journal, but it's a really cool, very traditional journal. We did a story a couple of episodes ago from Sinister Wisdom, which is a lesbian, focused, queer lesbian focused journal, very experimental and so forth. This is much more traditional, but I really like it. I think it's very well done and really have enjoyed, having it on hand for the last few weeks, few months. But we're going to look at a story called Big Gertie and Just Walter by Michele Alouf. Before we get into it, though, I want to kind of ask, and maybe particularly Grant, I was curious what your reaction to this question was going to be. In the table of contents, it lists like fiction, poetry, nonfiction, that kind of thing. But I've got some other journals that instead of like breaking up the prose into fiction and nonfiction or fiction and essays or however they might term it, they just call it prose. And in some cases, I don't get any help. Like when I get into the piece, is this a short story or is this, creative nonfiction? Is this kind of memoir piece? Obviously, if it's set on the planet Tralfamadore or something, I suspect it's probably not memoir unless you're Kurt Vonnegut. But if it's got like a first person narrator, particularly, it's like sometimes it's really difficult. And I want to know because as a reader, I have different expectations for a work of fiction versus a work of creative nonfiction. And years ago, I used to be a reader for a print journal that I think is defunct now. But it was before Submittable, before all that stuff. And so I would have to go to the editorial office and we'd have like baskets of manuscripts laying around and very old school. And I'd pick a folder. I think every folder had like 25 submissions in it or whatever. But the main editor, they just organize it prose and poetry. And so I started reading stuff, and a lot of times I wasn't sure, is this a short story or is it creative nonfiction? And I wasn't sure then how I should react to it, whether I should think it's really, really good or whether I should think, like, for example, creative nonfiction has a really difficult time having a really strong emotional impact at the end because life oftentimes doesn't have a real strong narrative arc, whereas you can do what you want to, basically. So I don't know, Grant, at North American Review, do you guys talk about prose and whether there's somewhat different ways to calibrate what's a really good piece of fiction versus a really good piece of nonfiction? I presume you guys specify, you definitely know this is a short story, or you definitely know this is a memoir piece or whatever.
Yeah, I don't. I know when we did the reboot around the time of our 150th anniversary. No, pardon me, 200th anniversary. We decided to give prose the same nonfiction the same respect as fiction. So back in the day when I first started doing NAR, art only appeared in fiction, and creative nonfiction was relegated to a 3-column format, whereas fiction had a 2-column format. And then when the reboot happened, I keep calling it reboot, redesign happened, we decided let's be more mindful and respectful to creative nonfiction. So there will be art, there will be photography accompanying CNF pieces, and it's laid out in 2-column format as opposed to what it used to be. And the 3-column format really sucked, especially on 8.5 by 11, because you'd have so many hyphenated words. Because it'd be, and even if you shut that off, it created a lot of air between the kerning between the letters would be problematic. So it didn't get the respect it deserves. So that's one thing. I also think the other thing that's happening in our field is there's all this border crossings. It's a big hot thing right now. And I was just down in Kansas honoring a faculty member, not a faculty member, but a former professor, a mentor of mine who passed. And it was sort of a get together of all of us students who had worked with him, and we read our own work and talked about him. And one of the guys there said, literature is another category. It's just another genre. I mean, it's all genre. So it's the idea of mingling these things. And I think about Tim O'Brien and the things they carried, and so I think one of the things that's happening, Ted, and one of the reasons I might do prose is that's kind of that genre mixing thing that's very popular. I mean, you see it with hybrid forms all the time. Like how much of the spec fic stuff I'm reading is dystopic science fiction. Some of it's hard science, very hard science, mixed with literary stylings. It's the new happening thing. So and I see it in creative nonfiction. I'm seeing it in the theses students are doing, whereas it used to be you do a fiction thesis or you do a poetry thesis. Now I have students that are doing all three, as part of their MA requirements, or they're mixing almost scholarly essays with creativity. Like it's just this whole blending of stuff. So I think that's part of what's happening, on the bigger litscape or lit biz. That's my take on it, I guess.
No, I want to get Brady in on this, but you reminded me that I've been attending for the last couple of sessions the International Conference on the Short Story in English, which is every 2 years, and last time it was in Killarney, Ireland last summer. Next summer it's going to be in Conway, Arkansas. But the last version in Killarney, it was the first version. That was like number 16, I think, the 16th annual or something. They allowed people to submit to the conference and then to read aloud at the conference creative nonfiction. And because, and that's kind of getting what you're saying, Grant, that, it used to be, it had to definitely be, because it's the International Conference in the Short Story, it had to be a short story, or at least an excerpt from a novel or something to qualify, but they kind of opened that up. And now, but yeah, I also found, I would go to people's readings, they usually had a panel of 3 readers and they'd be reading, and people wouldn't necessarily say what it was. And I'd find myself, listening to something and kind of enjoying it, but at the same time, wishing that I knew if it were fiction or creative nonfiction, particularly if someone's reading about some horrific childhood experience. And it's like, is this a fictitious experience, or did this really happen to this poor woman or whatever? And I don't know, it changes the filter and the way I'm responding to the text, and in a live performance, the way I'm responding to the writer. I don't know. Brady, do you find yourself responding differently to fiction versus nonfiction?
That's a great question. I'm not troubled by, and I share with Grant. I like that blurring. I like mixing genres, and I like mixing forms. I like letters alongside diary entries, alongside narrative passages. I like that mix, and so, yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying, Ted. I don't think I would be as troubled by it. I do, for my own part, and this is just an aside. But in my scholarly work, I've hewed pretty close to, very straightforward, argumentative, analytical work, and I don't myself have never been a particular fan of, though I don't, despise it in others, of mixing the personal with the analytical and the argumentative. Like I see that genre as separate, but I think I'm out of step with that. I think the interest in affect theory and the personal as the political, that long standing since the 60s, I think that changed academic writing. So I think you have to be open to all kinds of things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. All right. So anyway, as promised, let's get to our featured short story. Again, this is by Michele Alouf, and I'll say more about Michele in just a few minutes here. But the title of the story is Big Gertie and Just Walter. It's a very interesting structure. It's kind of in vignettes, chronologically arranged, and I'll do as I do and read from the beginning, and then just kind of give a brief synopsis of what the rest of the story entails without necessarily giving the ending, and then see what you guys have to say about Big Gertie and Just Walter from the Potomac Review. So first section opens with Rite of Baptism, 1970. What name do you, and this is in italics, by the way, what name do you give your child? Gertrude Conchetta. What do you ask of God's church for Gertrude Conchetta? Baptism. And we get into the first paragraph. Father Walter wipes his brow each time his gaze lands on the enormous baby girl kicking wildly, trying to free herself from a white lace gown and her father's grip. Sometimes even the bulk of the gold chalice seems too heavy for the newly ordained priest to bear. Outside, the Florida sun is the parchment pallor of a dead sand dollar. Still, it infiltrates the stained glass to sprinkle radiant confetti on the dutiful crowd. And I'm going to read just one more sentence, the first of the next paragraph, because I want to make a point about writing style here, and then I'll give my little synopsis. But the next sentence says, in polyester and pearls, the parents with the 5 fussy baptismal candidates line up as the cantor calls on a litany of saints for support. And that line in particular, but really throughout this whole story, is such a great example of bringing in poetic elements into prose, all the alliterative elements. You've got the P's and the F's and the L's, and then we've got the internal rhyming of the 5 and the line, and it goes on throughout the story. And I just love that. I try to do that in my writing as well. Something else I got from William Gass is to try to integrate, he called it jingling, to bring in poetic elements like alliteration, like internal rhyming, repetition and so forth into prose, etc. All right. So anyway, from there we get this story, a pretty brief story, really, that goes through Gertrude or Gertie, Big Gertie's life throughout childhood into her teenage years, into young adulthood and beyond. And it's all organized kind of by her Catholic life, so there's a section on her commencement, and there's a section on, this, that, or the other related to the Catholic rites and rituals and so forth, confirmation, and I guess I meant to say. And the other main character is this priest, Walter, who she literally meets at her baptism, but becomes, a constant sort of presence in her life throughout the rest of the story. And I don't think I want to give too much more away. I will say, though, that one of the things I really admire about this story is that in spite of being a brief story in terms of the number of words, number of pages, it has this really broad landscape. It takes into account many, many years of this main character's life. I've never written a story like that. I've never really written a novel like that. But I really admire writers who can do that. I teach a course in the long story and novella, and I used to always bring into the mix Brokeback Mountain, the Annie Proulx story. Because it's very short. In fact, it didn't even fit the long story, guidelines I set up, but I loved it so much. And the fact that it does this thing, you get basically an entire lifetime told, within, a very few number of pages, but yet it feels very full and you feel like you really get to know the character. And I think Michele Alouf does that here as well, where we really connect with Gertrude in particular, in spite of the fact it's a relatively short story, but we are with her for so much of her life in this story. So, Brady, let me kick it over to you. What were some of your thoughts on Big Gertie and Just Walter?
Yeah, I love this story. I mean, just as a quick aside, I think Alice Munro is another one of those writers. I mean, if we can talk about Alice Munro, but that can capture a life in a story. I mean, as her career went on, of course, her stories got longer, but she had that kind of magical way, I think, of getting a kind of novelistic feel into these short stories. But Big Gertie and Just Walter, a couple of observations, at least, and this has been a refrain across the course of our podcast, that there's this concern, or something deeper, something far more profound. Concern is not a good enough word for it, about women's bodies and women's lives and the lived experience of being in the world, being present in the world. And so Big Gertie has the story tells these complications. And so I was reminded of Rose Keating, the story from Odd Body, like that concern in the culture. So this story, I think, participates in this way. But the other observation, or a couple other observations then along those lines, this is a very funny, very charming, very sweet story, I think, in its way, or certainly that's my read of it. And one of the things I think that makes it charming, or that one of the things I loved about it, at least, I'm a sucker for stories, for narratives that are affirmative about community. Gertie has her antagonists, and she has her in particular in her college days, I won't give away any details, but a confrontation, an event that defines some part of her life. And so she does have her antagonists, but she does have family, and she does have Walter, and that friendship across time with Walter, Father Walter, and then just Walter. That I think made the story um, very successful, a great read. In fact, I was kind of sorry, when it ended. Like these are folks I would have gladly stayed with for a much, much longer time. So, and then just to go with you, Ted, I think the writing also works very well. So I think in about every measure that I would look for in a story, a success.
Yeah. I meant to include in my synopsis, I guess, that she has a pituitary condition, so she's grows faster and larger than the other kids, and then eventually becomes a very large woman in adulthood. But it always causes her all sorts of, she, personal problems and self-image problems, and she, you know, fantasizes about being petite like other girls in her class and being part of the cheerleader squad and blah 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 blah. But yeah, I knew you probably would bring up that body image issue because it does seem to come up with female characters, just story after story after story that we do. Yeah. Grant, what were some of your initial reactions to the story?
Everything Brady was saying is what I loved about the story. I mean, we've talked in previous podcasts about morality in fiction, and can you write a morals? I think it's a very moral story. I mean, from a Christian perspective, and I know you guys know I'm a believer, so I don't want to start thumping a Bible here, but I really believe in the passage from Matthew about the least of these. The idea of the social justice, you have to take care of the least of these, and the priest in the story to me is like an ideal figure of what we're supposed to be doing for others. And Brady mentioned community, and he's just a really moral person, and there for her, helping her, accepting her, more than accepting, like nurturing her. And I love that character, and I love Gertie, and I don't know, is it Therese? How would you say her name? Like I like even the I think the father who then isn't a father but is still a minister of some kind. I mean, it's just it's fascinating to me. And this is a writer who I think has respect for the characters she writes. There's dignity in the story, and it's just refreshing. We've talked about dystopic, and you could say this is kind of just because body image stuff, and that the clock on this woman's life is ticking a lot faster than for most of us because of the condition that she has. But the story has so much dignity and respect. We have a villain. We have antagonists. We've got a couple of people that aren't very nice, but we're clearly positioned to know how we're supposed to feel about those folks, and the community of the people we care about is presented in such positive ways. So I mean, maybe bringing things full circle, I feel this is a response a little bit to a lot of dystopic stuff we've been seeing. It has that sort of edge to it, but it has a lot of love. I mean, to me, it's a very, very positive story, and I'm with Brady. I got done, and I'm like, I want more pages. I want to be in the room with these two. I love these characters. And Ted, we've also talked about with my own work, not dumbing it down, but making it accessible. And this is a story that is very accessible. Part of it's the structure, but it's just it's it's like people in their natural skins talking to us, like just with all their flaws and everything else, but we love them because there's not all that. And that's not a criticism of writers that do this, because I love that other stuff too. Like I was at a reading this weekend, and somebody had taken like the Odyssey and had a voice of a character through another. It was sort of like this William Maxwell move. It was fantastic. I mean, but you had to be really listening, and you had to work at it to get it. And I even told the author after, so I don't get everything you're doing, but I'm sure if I see it on the page, I would. But I said, man, it is really fucking great. But this is great too. And sorry, auditors, but this is great too. And I love, I love the simplicity, the elegance, the love. It just got a lot of love. That's what I came away from, and I felt good after reading it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was so relieved when I first read the story that there was a priest and he was a good guy.
Yeah.
He was like, Bing Crosby as a priest,
Yeah.
you know. So often, unfortunately, we end up with priests and other kind of religious figures who are,
Pedophiles.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a nice change of pace.
Yeah.
It does have kind of a cliche mean nun character, but I'm not saying that as a criticism of the story, because
No, no.
but even that sister, I mean, she's trying to do the right thing for the kids, and in maybe a way that we don't necessarily always agree with. But yeah, the touch of humor here and there is just really nice. I had just a particularly, it's just a sentence I loved in particular. This is page 62 for you guys with your copies, but towards the bottom of the page, this is in the section from 1977, the First Communion section, and says Big Gertie vacillates between guilt and shame in a dress lovingly made by her sewing impaired mother. She should be grateful, but hates the voluminous lace catastrophe that makes her feel like an ogre popping out of a cake. And that's just lovely. I love that phrase. Her sewing impaired mother, and that's the other thing. Her parents aren't perfect, and sometimes they make decisions that make her unhappy, and so forth and so on. But, in general, they're trying to do the right thing and they're supportive. And they've got this difficult situation where they've got this daughter that has this very difficult medical condition that they're trying to deal with too. And so, yeah, there's just all kinds of lovely things happening. But I really like the organization of the story, not just in vignettes, but specifically vignettes that have to do with different evolutionary steps or whatever you want to say in the life of a Catholic, from baptism to First Communion to confirmation and on and on and on. I thought that was just a really clever way of organizing the story, probably something I would not have thought of, but I thought it worked very well. Brady, let me come back to you. Did you, I assume you felt like that organizational approach was effective. Have you ever tried to do something like that in any of your work?
Oh no, not in that way, but this works really well. I mean, this is really a accomplished work, and yeah, I'll just agree. Like, I really like the structure of it around the Catholic pattern of life, and Alouf does a wonderful job. And just to derail the conversation again and take this back to something said earlier, this is not a Gothic story. This is not a horror story, right? This is one of the things that makes, I think, this so great, and a kind of response, a kind of answer to some of the stories that we've talked about all along the way, is that it's not, yes, Gertie has her issues and she has her frustrations, but she's charming, and she does great, and she looks after herself, and she has connections in the world. And so maybe for the first time in many of the stories we've read that have been about the matter of the body, this is not a Gothic story. This is not a horror story. We're not, it's not being creeped out the whole damn time, but rather quite the opposite.
Yeah, and I think I don't know how to explain this, but the the structure puts a familiar on the narrative. Like, those who, I'm not Catholic, but I know of these things that the work is supporting. So that I don't mean normal. When I say that, then I feel like I'm saying that the characters have normal. That's not what I mean. But there's a way in which the structure of the Catholic moves in life gives it a kind of familiarity. But then within that familiarity is this narrative tension, gigantism, whatever this condition is that our one of our lead characters has. It puts the story in defamiliar grounds, but it doesn't decide that through the defamiliar to go into darkness. Like, there are some dark elements, but to me, I loved what Brady said about community, and I hadn't articulated that for myself until I heard Brady talk, but that's what I think I love about this story is there's a even the joke about the woman that the priest made, Julie Andrews, that's fantastic. I mean,
It's
the
great.
hills are
It's a good
alive.
gag.
I
Yeah,
know. And
it's
this
a
story
good
is
gag.
alive. There is a kind of sound of music to it that is good, and wow,
Well, and Walter always calls her by the full name. Like
yes,
that's a great gag, right?
yes.
That's
And it's
sweet. Yeah.
respectful and mindful of
Yeah, yeah.
instead of just hey big Gertie, how you doing? Like it's just it's great. It's so much love in it. I keep coming back to that, but it was just refreshing. I read so much dark stuff,
And
with downbeat stuff that this was really cool.
Yeah. Well, and I love the idea about community as well. And by the end of the story, again, not to give anything, too specific away, but I mean, I think there is a sense of a larger community that Gertie may have found finally. But if not, at least through much of her life, her community is Walter and
Mhm.
his going out of his way to be her friend when other people would not be her friend, and I mean to be a true friend, not just for show or whatever. And I think that is important. I don't think you need to have a community of 1,000 people. I mean, not to get all sentimental, but you guys are my community. I mean, this is one of the reasons I really love doing this podcast is because I mean, does the world need another podcast? Probably not, but I need this time with you guys. There's no one else in my world that feels the same way about writing, who feels the same way about literature, who has the same experience in terms of teaching literature, teaching creative writing, teaching those kinds of things. I mean, I have a lot of cool people I interact with, but they don't have those exact same interests. And I really emphasize this with my creative writing students, particularly my graduate students, who most of whom are older, some are quite a bit older, and they're kind of coming back to school to get their MFA, that kind of thing. But we have an introductory course in particular that sometimes I teach, and one of the things I really push in there is that one of your goals by the time you finish the program is to find some kind of writing community. And I don't necessarily mean a critique group, although that can be part of it. So I've never liked really sharing my writing with anybody, but before it's other than just editors and publishers and stuff, but people who speak your same language and who you're trying to do the same kinds of things you're doing, and who can relate to your little triumphs and your many rejections and so forth. And I think that's really important to keep going and to keep being a productive writer, because there's so many, most people in our life don't understand what we're doing. My mentor, who I lost several years ago, Kent Harriff, died way too young from cancer. But he used to say to us in workshop and other classes, the world doesn't need another story. And he wasn't trying to be mean. He was one of the nicest guys in the world. But what he meant was that if we're going to keep producing work, it's going to have to come from in here, because just about everybody else in our environment, they don't care if we write another story or another poem or another whatever. No one's going to come banging on our door if it's been a few months and they haven't seen any more creative writing from us. And in fact, most of the people in our lives would probably prefer that we didn't hang out by ourselves for hours at a time. They want us to be more active at work. They want us to be more active with the family unit. They want to be making dinner, dishes to take to the church potluck or something, but we're squirreled away, writing whatever. And so it really takes a lot of drive to keep doing what we're doing, because there are so many elements in our world that don't care if we do it, and in some cases don't want us to be doing it. And Grant, I kind of saw you're nodding
Yeah.
periodically throughout that. What are your thoughts on all that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, writing is a lonely biz, but I love it. I don't mind being alone. I love going off and writing something and then entering into a different world and just that dreamscape that you kind of get into. And the other thing, the reason I was nodding so much is we're just in this time of transactional. Everything's got to be transactional. You got to get a job with your degree. And I get it. Education's expensive, but if it doesn't pay a certain amount of dividends, we're going to cut funding to that program. We're not going to give loans to people that are getting a degree in sculpture or whatever, painting. And I'm afraid it's going to happen with the language arts too. I can just see oh, you get done in 4 years and you're only making this much money. And often English lit majors make about this one, and then they climb after that. The dividends aren't right away, but we just we let Trump can't see the world except in transaction. I get something from you, then I give you something. It's just, and to me, I became an academic in part because I just love books and I wanted to learn. I wanted to expand as an artist, as a person. And I wasn't thinking about sure, when I got done with my PhD, I wanted a job, but that was never why I got into this. And I just hate the besmirching of the humanities. It's been going on for years, but it's getting the needle's on red right now, and I feel under attack, and I hate it especially when former students of mine post on Facebook about their woes and how they have an English lit degree and they're not able to get a job. And I understand their frustrations, but it just feeds into this mentality that getting a degree in English in literature, studying literature it's a waste of time, and it makes me furious. So that was part of what I was nodding at, Ted. It's just coming back to our early part of our conversation and the dystopic. I cringe whenever I hear people saying negative things about our field because I think it's so important to the to just humanity. I mean, we need people to be studying this stuff. It's not just about, oh, I do this and then I get a $70,000 a year job and that's great. It's carryover effect. Look at us. We're in our 60s. You guys are retired. I'll retire eventually, but man, look how active we are because of the pursuits that we started. My dad was bored out of his effing mind after he retired. I mean, he just sat on the couch, watched hockey. He ended up volunteering it. He worked at a food barn and helped load the candies, like a candy barn place. He loaded backs of trucks because he just needed something to do. I mean, he only read like two or three books in his lifetime that I remember seeing him read. So, it's sorry, getting a little emotional just thinking about it, thinking about my pop and just how hard it was for him because he hadn't pursued those interests as a young man. So anyway, I just sorry to go off the rails there, but that's my take. That's what I was nodding about.
Well, here, community. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Brady, what are some of your thoughts on any of that?
Well, the world needs our podcast.
True.
Come on, community. And I can say I am very sympathetic to what Grant is saying. I retired early because I became weary, and that's putting it mildly, of the message that one receives all the time from the administration. And the message is go away. We don't want what you're offering. We want to cut. We want to gut your programs. And they did. They took our masters in literature. They took our Irish studies program. They took our masters in teacher ed. And they just like every day the message was, we're getting out of the business and you need to go. And they didn't support the humanities. And our former president is now running for a Senate in Montana. So that's a whole other conversation. I won't weigh in on that on this occasion. But to bring this around to the affirmative, like Ted, I look forward to our discussions, and I'm always glad. I'm always, fighting my impulse to text you guys because what do we have? We have in my heart of hearts the idea again of community. It's so sustaining, and yeah, the world is telling us to go away. It's not just we don't care what you're doing, but actually, go away. So to find folks that you can talk about the things that you're passionate about and that you love doing, writing, reading, staying alive, going for a walk, going to the mountains. I mean, all that stuff. Yeah, that to me is uh, the best.
Yeah. Well, the topic of community, especially among writers, is a great segue to sharing a little more about our featured author, Michele Alouf, and I hope I'm saying that last name correctly, Alouf. But and you'll see why in just a second. She lives in Richmond, Virginia, and holds a master's degree in creative writing from Harvard Extension School. She is a founder of the Writers Collective Short Story Writers. Michele's work has appeared in New World Writing Quarterly, Vestal Review, Gulfstream Magazine, Bridge 8, Drunk Monkeys, and other publications. Her story, Lonnie, or Laney, I'm not sure, from the fall 2025 issue of New World Writing Quarterly was nominated for Pushcart Prize. And that story street writers sounds really interesting. I kind of tried to find more information about Michele online, and it seems that she did have a website at one point, but it's no longer something she's kept up. It goes to like a blank whatever. So I don't think she has that any longer. She's on X, but doesn't post super frequently, I don't think. Probably good for her. But she does have a pretty strong presence at this Story Street Writers, which is an online community of writers supporting writing writers, blah blah blah, and so forth. So that's definitely worth checking out. Check out. You can find out a lot more about her there because there's some bio stuff at that site, more about Michele. But she seems like she's kind of wrapped up a lot of her professional interests in this writers collective, and obviously that's very much the idea of community based on writing and literature and that kind of thing. So anyway, great story. Really enjoyed it, and so I appreciate you guys. I'll come around one last time here. If you have anything else you want to say about Big Gertie and Just Walter, that's fine. Or if you have some concluding remarks for this episode, that's also fine. But let me swing back to you, Grant. Do you have any final bits you want to share with us?
No, I guess love the story, and I guess just to bring things back to I wish I knew my scripture better than I do. But the quote from Matthew, I think, is so important. The least of these, I feel as an educator, that's part of my job. I mean, I part of being a teacher of writing is to nurture future writers, even if they're not going to publish a lot, that they're going to keep writing when they're in their 50s and 60s, and to give them the confidence to grow and find their own vision. And so I was thinking back to the conversation we had before we went on the air with the person that thought they'd be the ideal editor. And I really think a really good editor, is more hands-off than hands-on, and is really good at helping the writer find what the text is trying to do rather than whatever they think is going to be the most current commercial success, working with writers to achieve the goal that they want in their work. And I just think that's so important. So anyway, love the story. Would love to have a story like this in workshop, because I get a lot of dark stuff in my classes, and it's nice to have something fresh and different. Loved it.
Great. Yeah. Brady.
Oh yeah, love the story, and I've been thinking a lot lately. This is in the context of many of the things we've talked about in today's podcast. But my daughter has a profound influence on my reading and my movie watching, and she's a big fan, and so inspired me to rewatch, which I have not seen in 25 years. I don't know, Fried Green Tomatoes, and I haven't read the book, but I ordered a copy. And what I loved about that movie was it has the balance. Like, terrible things happen, and it's about race in America, and it's about sexuality and gender, but it's also affirmatively about community, and it's about love, and it balances all those things. Because I know in my own writing, I certainly can dig deep into the grimness, maybe try to balance it with some humor. But that notion of community, something sustaining in this world, I love that movie. By the end, it was the same feeling as I had with our story today. Like, I could really spend more time with these folks. Like I was glad to be in their company. Not all of them, there were villains, but as a community, yeah. Yeah, it's great. And then I'll just end up I'm going nattering on too much, but the question we talked about multitasking, I think everybody has, if you're in the writing life, you have to think about that for yourself. Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to prioritize? And it's the same with the reading the big books. You read that big book, Time's Winged Chariot at your back. You may not be doing something else. So those are all tactical decisions everybody has to confront.
Well, and I don't mean to start a whole nother branch here at the end, but we both know someone who you guys don't know, this person, but I know them, who has kind of landed what for a lot of writers is the big dream, the big New York agent, publishing multi-book publishing deal with one of the big five publishers. Movie deals are in the works because they came up with this detective series, and it really has taken off and it's going gangbusters. And so by every standard definition, this person is a successful writer, living the dream. They are very unhappy because they've got all of these ideas for other things they want to write that have nothing to do with this detective series that they came up with, but their agent and their publisher won't stand for them to write anything else. All they want are continuations of this series. And in fact, writing something even under a pen name in a different series is prohibited by their contract, because your Amazon algorithm is determined by sort of the aggregate of all of your book sales. And so if this person published some books that didn't do nearly as well, and it was discovered that even under a pen name that was this person, then their main book algorithm would go down, and so they're not allowed to write anything other than this main series. So my point here is that what a lot of us, especially maybe earlier in our lives, would have said, yeah, that they've got it, that is it, the agent, the big book deal, the movie contracts. They were way happier as a writer, as an artist, before any of that came along. So there you go. I'll end on that note right there. Right. Well, thank you guys for giving up some time today, and thank Potomac Review, great little literary journal. Check it out if you're a writer or a reader interested in such stuff. Thanks to Michele Alouf for writing a very great and life-affirming short story and having it appear in that journal. And I'll see you guys in about a month or so. I think we'll probably be in contact individually about different projects we have going on. I'll look forward to that as well. All right. So I will hit the stop record if I can meander my way there through the labyrinth of drop-down screens.